The gunshot echoed across the plains like a crack of thunder, sending a flock of startled birds scattering into the azure Montana sky. Abigail Shaw steadied the reins of her wagon with trembling hands, her heart racing as she gazed down at the smoking revolver beside her. The would-be robber had fled, disappearing into the tall grass that swayed in the early summer breeze, leaving behind nothing but boot prints and the lingering scent of gunpowder. "Lord, help me," she whispered, tucking a strand of auburn hair back beneath her bonnet. The 5 small faces peering out from beneath the wagon's canvas cover reminded her why she couldn't afford to be afraid, not now, not with so much depending on her. It was 1876, and the journey from Billings had been long and treacherous. The orphaned children Mary, Joseph, Thomas, Sarah, and little William watched her with wide, uncertain eyes. They had already lost so much. Abigail was determined they wouldn't lose their chance at a new beginning. "Are we still going to the ranch, Miss Shaw?" Mary asked, her small voice barely audible above the creak of wagon wheels. Abigail nodded firmly. "We certainly are. Mr. Maxwell's ranch is just beyond that ridge. We'll be there before sunset, God willing." She hadn't met Blake Maxwell in person, only through a series of exchanged letters after the church in Billings had burned down, leaving these 5 children with nowhere to go. The nearby orphanage was already overcrowded, and when Reverend Johnson had mentioned a wealthy rancher looking for workers, Abigail had written immediately. Maxwell's response had been brief but clear. He could use help on his ranch and had room for those willing to work. What she hadn't mentioned was that the workers were children, or that she, a 24-year-old schoolteacher, would be accompanying them. The wagon crested the hill, revealing a sprawling valley below. Nestled against the foothills of distant mountains lay the Maxwell Ranch, larger than Abigail had imagined, with a handsome 2-story house, several barns, and vast fenced pastures dotted with cattle. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the scene, making it look like something from a painting. "Is that it?" Thomas asked, his 11-year-old face pressed against the canvas. "Yes," Abigail replied, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. "That's our new home." As they approached the ranch, a tall figure emerged from the barn, leading a magnificent chestnut stallion. Even from a distance, Abigail could tell the man was watching them, his stance alert and wary. She guided the wagon into the yard, coming to a stop several paces from where the man stood. Up close, Blake Maxwell was more imposing than she'd anticipated, broad-shouldered with sun-bronzed skin, dark hair falling just below his collar, and eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea. A few days' worth of stubble covered his jaw, and his clothes, though dusty from a day's work, were of good quality. "Mr. Maxwell," Abigail called out, setting the brake on the wagon. "That's right," he replied, his voice deep and measured. "And you would be Abigail Shaw. I wrote to you about the position." She climbed down from the wagon seat, wincing slightly at her stiff muscles. Maxwell's eyes narrowed. "You wrote about workers for the ranch. I expected men." Before Abigail could respond, Mary's curious face appeared at the edge of the wagon cover, followed quickly by the others. Maxwell's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "Children? You brought children to my cattle ranch." The incredulity in his voice was unmistakable. Abigail straightened her spine. "These children need a home, Mr. Maxwell. They're hard workers, I assure you. The boys can learn ranch work, and Mary's already handy with a needle and thread. Sarah's quick with figures, and even little William can gather eggs and feed chickens." "This is no place for orphans, Miss Shaw," Maxwell said firmly. "A cattle ranch is dangerous work. There are 100 ways a child could get hurt or worse." "They have nowhere else to go," Abigail replied, her voice catching. "The church in Billings burned to the ground. Reverend Johnson is trying to rebuild, but it will take months, maybe years. The orphanage can't take any more children." A flicker of something, perhaps compassion, crossed Maxwell's face, but he shook his head. "I'm sorry for their situation, truly I am, but this isn't a suitable place." "Please," Abigail stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Just one night. We've been traveling for days. We can leave tomorrow if you still feel the same way." Maxwell ran a hand through his hair, glancing at the children's hopeful faces. The sun was setting rapidly now, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The thought of sending them back out into the wilderness with night approaching clearly troubled him. "One night," he agreed reluctantly. "The bunkhouse is empty, the hands are out on the North Range until tomorrow." "You can stay there." Relief washed over Abigail. "Thank you, Mr. Maxwell, we won't be any trouble." Maxwell turned to lead the way when little William, no more than 5 years old, tumbled out of the wagon and ran straight to the rancher, looking up with wide blue eyes. "Do you have horses?" "Real ones, can I see them?" The boy's excitement was palpable. Maxwell stared down at the child, seeming unsure how to respond to such unbridled enthusiasm. After a moment, his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, I have horses, real ones." He gestured toward the corral where several horses grazed peacefully. "That's Thunder, my stallion. The bay mare is Duchess and the pinto is Scout." William's face lit up with wonder. "They're beautiful." The other children had clambered out of the wagon now, standing in a neat row as Abigail had taught them. Maxwell's gaze swept over them, taking in their worn but clean clothes, their thin but eager faces. "Well," he said finally, "let's get you all settled for the night." The bunkhouse was simple but clean, with 2 rows of beds along the walls and a pot-bellied stove in the center. Abigail quickly organized the children, helping them unpack their meager belongings while Maxwell fetched water from the pump and lit the stove. "There's stew in the main house," he said, heading for the door. "I'll bring some over." When he returned with a large pot of rabbit stew and a basket of fresh bread, the children's faces brightened. They ate hungrily, and Abigail realized it had been too long since they'd had a proper meal. Maxwell watched them from the doorway, his expression unreadable. After they'd finished eating, he helped Abigail clear away the dishes. "Where exactly did you plan to take them?" he asked quietly as they stood outside the bunkhouse. Abigail looked up at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. "I didn't have a plan beyond getting here," she admitted. I prayed you would let us stay." "I advertised for ranch hands, Miss Shaw, not for children. Children grow into adults, Mr. Maxwell. These children need to learn to work, to contribute. They need purpose and stability." She turned to face him fully. "I can teach them. I was a school teacher in Billings. I can continue their education while they learn ranch work." Maxwell sighed, running a hand over his face. "And what about you? What do you get out of this arrangement?" The question caught her off guard. "I get to keep my promise to their parents to see them raised right, with opportunities for a better life." Their parents, most died in the fire. William's mother was already gone consumption. His father was helping with the church reconstruction when the scaffolding collapsed. Abigail's voice grew quiet. "I promised I'd look after him after all of them." Maxwell was silent for a long moment, studying her face in the moonlight. "You're very young to take on such responsibility." "Age doesn't determine capability, Mr. Maxwell, or commitment." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, I suppose it doesn't." He turned toward the main house, then paused. "Get some rest, Miss Shaw. We'll talk more in the morning." Abigail watched him walk away, his silhouette strong against the night sky. She said a silent prayer that his heart would soften by morning light. When dawn broke, Abigail was already awake, helping the children wash and dress. They had just finished a simple breakfast of oatmeal cooked over the stove when Maxwell appeared at the door, accompanied by an older woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. "Miss Shaw, this is Mrs. Hollies, my housekeeper," Maxwell said. "She's agreed to show you around the main house while I assess the children's abilities." Mrs. Hollies nodded politely. "Welcome to Maxwell Ranch, miss." "Assess them?" Abigail questioned, immediately protective. "If they're to stay, I need to know what they can do," Maxwell replied matter-of-factly. "Age, experience, aptitude." Abigail hesitated. "You're considering letting us stay?" "I'm considering it," he confirmed, though his expression remained guarded. "Come along, boys," he called to Thomas and Joseph. "Let's see what you know about horses." As the boys eagerly followed Maxwell, Mrs. Hollies gestured for Abigail to accompany her to the main house with Mary, Sarah, and William trailing behind. The Maxwell home was impressive, solidly built with fine furnishings that spoke of prosperity without ostentation. Large windows allowed sunlight to flood the rooms, and a massive stone fireplace dominated the living area. "It's beautiful," Abigail remarked, running her fingers along a polished oak banister. "It needs a woman's touch," Mrs. Hollis replied. "Mr. Maxwell built this house for a family, but—" She trailed off, seeming to catch herself. "Well, that's neither here nor there. The kitchen's through here." Throughout the morning, Abigail and the girls helped Mrs. Hollis with household chores while William explored the garden under the housekeeper's watchful eye. By midday, the boys returned with Maxwell, their faces flushed with excitement. "Mr. Maxwell let us brush down the horses," Thomas exclaimed, "and he says I'm old enough to learn to ride. Is that so?" Abigail looked to Maxwell, who seemed more relaxed than he had the previous evening. "They're quick learners," he admitted. "Joseph has a natural way with animals. Thomas is eager if a bit impulsive." After lunch, Maxwell invited Abigail to walk with him to the corral, where they could observe the boys continuing their lessons with Miguel, the ranch's head wrangler. "Your boys have potential," Maxwell said as they leaned against the fence. "Joseph especially. He's patient, a good quality around skittish horses." "And the girls?" Abigail asked. "Mrs. Hollis says Mary's quite skilled with a needle. Sarah's too small for heavy work, but she's bright. The little one, William, he's fearless, isn't he?" Abigail smiled fondly. "Sometimes too much so. I constantly worry he'll find trouble." They watched in silence as Joseph cautiously approached a young colt, speaking softly and offering an apple. The horse nickered gently, accepting the treat. "Miss Shaw," Maxwell began, his voice serious, "I've been thinking about your situation." Abigail held her breath, waiting. "This ranch is no orphanage. It's a working cattle operation with real dangers, but—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "There's room here, work that needs doing, and those children deserve a chance." Hope blossomed in Abigail's chest. "Are you saying we can stay?" Maxwell turned to face her, his expression solemn but no longer unwelcoming. "I'm saying we can try. The boys can learn ranching under Miguel's supervision. The girls can help Mrs. Hollis and continue their studies with you. We'll convert the old foreman's cabin for you and the girls. The boys can stay in the bunkhouse. Once the hands return, they'll be a good influence." Tears of relief sprang to Abigail's eyes. "Mr. Maxwell, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he warned. "This won't be easy. There will be rules, strict ones for their safety and everyone else's." "Of course," Abigail agreed quickly. "They're good children, they'll obey." Maxwell nodded, then added quietly, "They came from the church in Billings with Reverend Johnson?" "Yes. He was trying to find homes for all the orphans after the fire." A shadow passed over Maxwell's face. "I know Johnson. He christened my sister's children." He seemed about to say more, then changed course. "We'll need to make arrangements, draw up proper papers. I'll ride into town tomorrow, speak with Judge Harmon." "What sort of papers?" Abigail asked, suddenly concerned. "Guardianship papers. If they're to live on my property under my protection, we should make things official." He must have noticed her alarm because he added, "You'll retain your role as their teacher and caretaker, Miss Shaw. But legally, they'll be wards of the ranch. It's for their protection as much as anything." Abigail considered this. It made sense, though the thought of relinquishing any authority over the children gave her pause. "And my position here, what exactly would that be?" "Governess, I suppose," Maxwell replied. "You'll be provided room and board, plus a modest salary. Your primary responsibility will be the children's education and well-being." It was more than Abigail had dared hope for. "Thank you, Mr. Maxwell, truly." He nodded, then turned his attention back to the corral, where Thomas was now attempting to lead a gentle mare in a circle. "There's one more thing, Miss Shaw." "Yes," Maxwell's voice was quiet but firm. "These children, if they're to live here, work here, grow here, then they're ours now, mine and yours, not just charges or students or workers, ours. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Abigail studied his profile, seeing beneath the stern exterior to the man who would open his home to 5 orphans and a penniless schoolteacher. "I do," she replied softly. Then it's ours now, all of it the responsibility, the work, the joy of watching them grow. Something in Maxwell's expression shifted, a tension releasing. He offered her a genuine smile for the first time, not broad or effusive, but real. Then we have an agreement. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The foreman's cabin was cleared out, cleaned thoroughly, and furnished with beds for Abigail and the girls. Maxwell ordered lumber from town to add an additional room, working alongside his ranch hands to complete the construction before the first autumn chill. The children adapted to ranch life with remarkable resilience. Thomas and Joseph rose early each morning to help with chores before their lessons, eager to earn their keep. Mary took to helping Mrs. Hollies with cooking and mending, while Sarah, though only 7, proved adept at collecting eggs and feeding the chickens without frightening them. William, the youngest at 5, became everyone's shadow, soaking up knowledge like a sponge and charming even the most gruff ranch hands with his endless questions and sunny disposition. Abigail established a schoolroom in a corner of the main house's library, teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, and history each morning. In the afternoons, the children dispersed to their respective duties, practical education that Abigail considered equally valuable. As September turned to October, Abigail noticed subtle changes in Blake Maxwell. The stern rancher who had initially balked at the idea of children on his property now paused during his workday to watch Thomas practicing his roping skills or to listen to Mary recite her multiplication tables. He began joining them for evening meals, something Mrs. Hollies confided he had rarely done before, preferring to eat alone in his study. One evening, after the children had been tucked into bed, Abigail found Maxwell on the porch of the main house, smoking a pipe and gazing at the stars. She hesitated in the doorway, not wanting to intrude on his solitude. "You don't need to hover in the shadows, Miss Shaw," he said without turning around. "Come sit if you like." Abigail moved to join him, settling into a rocking chair adjacent to his. The night was clear and cool, the vast Montana sky ablaze with stars. "The children are settling in well," she observed. "Joseph told me Miguel is teaching him to track cattle by their hoof prints." Maxwell nodded. "The boy has a good eye. In a few years he'll make a fine cowhand." And Thomas, eager as always, sometimes too eager. He tried to saddle Thunder today. Fortunately, Miguel stopped him before he got himself kicked. Abigail sighed. "He's always been the daredevil. I'll speak with him." "I already did," Maxwell replied. "He understands now why some rules can't be broken." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the rocking chairs and the distant lowing of cattle. "May I ask you something, Mr. Maxwell?" Abigail finally said. "You may ask. I might not answer." "Why did you change your mind about us staying? You were quite adamant that first night that a ranch was no place for orphans." Maxwell took his time responding, tamping down his pipe and setting it aside. "Do you know much about this ranch, Miss Shaw? How I came to own it?" "Very little," she admitted. "My father built this place from nothing. Came out here in 42 with my mother, my sister, and me. I was 10 years old." His voice took on a distant quality, as though the memories were playing out before him. "It was wilderness then, beautiful but harsh. We lived in a one-room cabin that first year. My mother taught us by lantern light after the day's work was done." Abigail could picture it, a younger Blake Maxwell, learning his letters while the wind howled outside. "When I was 16, my father was killed by rustlers. My mother kept the ranch going, but it nearly broke her. My sister married a few years later and moved east. When Mother passed 5 years ago, the ranch came to me." He paused, meeting Abigail's gaze. "I know what it is to be a child in this unforgiving country. I know the value of education alongside practical skills." "So the children remind you of yourself," Abigail suggested gently. Maxwell shook his head. "They remind me of what might have been. My wife Catherine and I, we had plans for a large family." Abigail felt a pang of understanding. "I didn't know you were married. 5 years. She died in childbirth, our son with her." The words were spoken plainly, but Abigail could hear the carefully controlled pain beneath them. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Maxwell acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. This house was built for children, Miss Shaw. For laughter and learning and the chaos of family life. For years after Catherine died, I couldn't bear the thought of filling it again. He glanced toward the bunkhouse where the boys slept, then to the foreman's cabin where the girls were tucked in for the night. But when I saw those children looking up at me with such hope, I realized Catherine would have opened our door without a second thought. Abigail felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "They're fortunate to have found you, Mr. Maxwell." "Blake," he said suddenly. "If we're to raise these children together, you might as well use my given name." "Blake," she repeated, finding she liked the sound of it. "And I'm Abigail, though most call me Abby." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Abby, then." As autumn deepened, the ranch prepared for winter. Hay was stored, repairs were made to buildings, and provisions were laid in for the months when travel would be difficult. Blake insisted on new winter clothes for all the children, taking Abigail into town to select warm coats, boots, and mittens. In the general store, as Abigail deliberated between two different coats for Sarah, she noticed Blake watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No," he replied, seeming almost embarrassed to be caught staring. "I was just thinking how different you look from when you first arrived." Abigail glanced down at herself. Her plain dress was still modest, but it was new, a gift from Blake after he'd noticed the threadbare state of her clothing. Her hair was neatly pinned, and her skin had taken on a healthy glow from daily rides around the ranch with the children. "I suppose ranch life agrees with me," she said with a small smile. "It does," Blake confirmed, his gaze lingering a moment longer before he turned his attention to the shopkeeper. "We'll take both coats, Mr. Daniels, and add those mittens for William, the blue ones." On the ride back to the ranch, with the wagon loaded with packages, Abigail found herself stealing glances at Blake's profile. Over the past 2 months, she had come to admire many things about him: his fairness with the ranch hands, his patience with the children, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. At 34, he was 10 years her senior, but the difference didn't seem significant when they worked side by side. "Penny for your thoughts," Blake said, catching her gaze. Abigail felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking about how much has changed since summer. The children are thriving here. I feared they would feel displaced after losing the church, but they've found a true home." "And you?" Blake asked. "Have you found a home as well?" The question was asked casually, but Abigail sensed an undercurrent of something more significant. "I have," she replied honestly. "I never expected to feel so settled, so purposeful." Blake nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. As they crested the hill overlooking the ranch, he drew the wagon to a halt, allowing them both to take in the view. The ranch buildings looked small from this distance, nestled in the valley with mountains rising beyond. Smoke curled from the chimney of the main house, and in the yard they could make out the small figures of the children playing under Mrs. Hollis's watchful eye. "It's beautiful," Abigail breathed. "It is," Blake agreed, though when she turned, she found him looking not at the view but at her. The first snowfall came in late November, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. The children were ecstatic, building snowmen and engaging in spirited snowball fights that often included the ranch hands. Even Blake joined in, showing the boys how to make perfect snowballs and teaching William to make snow angels. Abigail watched from the porch of the main house, her heart full at the sight of their joy. Mrs. Hollis came to stand beside her, 2 steaming mugs of coffee in her hands. "It does an old heart good to see him like this," the housekeeper remarked, passing one of the mugs to Abigail. "There were years after Catherine died when I thought he'd never smile again." "He's a good man," Abigail said, warming her hands on the mug. "The children adore him." Mrs. Hollis gave her a knowing look. "And what about you, Miss Shaw? What are your feelings toward our Mr. Maxwell?" Abigail nearly choked on her coffee. I respect him greatly, of course. We work well together with the children." "MMHMM," Mrs. Hollis hummed, clearly unconvinced. "And I suppose that's why you both light up like lanterns whenever the other enters a room." Before Abigail could form a response, a shout from the yard drew their attention. Thomas had climbed onto a snowdrift that had formed on the roof of the storage shed and was preparing to jump into a pile of snow below. "Thomas Edward," Abigail called sharply. "You get down from there this instant the proper way." Blake was already striding toward the shed, his expression a mixture of alarm and exasperation. "Son, that roof isn't stable. Come down carefully." Thomas, hearing the concern in Blake's voice, abandoned his plan and carefully made his way back to the edge of the roof where a ladder was propped. Once he was safely on the ground, Blake placed a hand on his shoulder, speaking to him in low tones that Abigail couldn't hear from the porch. "He called him son," Mrs. Hollis observed quietly. "First time I've heard that." Abigail had noticed it too, and the casual endearment sent a warm flutter through her chest. Over the past months, Blake had become increasingly paternal with the children, but this was the first time he had explicitly acknowledged the relationship. That evening, after the children were asleep, Blake invited Abigail to join him by the fire in the main house. It had become something of a ritual for them to share the quiet evening hours, discussing the children's progress, ranch matters, or simply enjoying each other's company. "Thomas is restricted to the yard for the next 3 days," Blake informed her as she settled into her usual chair. "No adventures, no riding. He needs to understand that reckless behavior has consequences." "That seems fair," Abigail agreed, "though he'll complain bitterly about missing his riding lesson. Better a disappointed boy than an injured one." Blake stoked the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "I've been meaning to ask you something, Abby." "Oh," she looked up from her mending, curious about his serious tone. "Christmas is approaching. I thought perhaps we might make it special for the children, a proper celebration with a tree, gifts, a feast." He seemed almost nervous, running a hand through his hair. "I haven't celebrated Christmas properly since Catherine died. I wouldn't know where to begin." Abigail's heart warmed at the suggestion. "I think that's a wonderful idea. The children would be overjoyed." "Good." Blake nodded, relief evident in his expression. "I'll arrange for a tree, and perhaps a trip to town for you to select gifts. Mrs. Hollis can manage the cooking, but she might appreciate your help with the planning." "Of course." Abigail set aside her mending. "Blake, may I ask you something as well?" "Certainly." "Earlier today, when you spoke to Thomas, you called him son." Blake looked momentarily surprised, then thoughtful. "Did I? I didn't realize. You did. It was nice. He needs that a father figure." Blake was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "When Catherine and I lost our son, I thought that part of my life was over the chance to be a father." He looked up, meeting Abigail's gaze. "I never expected to find it again in such an unconventional way." "Life rarely follows the paths we expect," Abigail replied softly. "No, it doesn't." Blake rose from his chair and moved to stand near the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "These past months have been healing. Having you and the children here, watching this house become a home again." Abigail set her mending aside and joined him at the window. "I feel the same way. After the church fire, I was so lost, so worried about the children's future. Finding this place was an answer to prayers I was almost afraid to voice." They stood side by side, shoulders nearly touching, watching the moonlight glitter on the snow. Abigail was acutely aware of Blake's presence, of the gentle rhythm of his breathing, of the clean scent of soap and pine that always seemed to surround him. "Abby," he said at last, turning to face her, "I want you to know how much I admire what you've done for these children. Your courage, your dedication, it's remarkable." "They're worth every sacrifice," she replied simply. "Yes, they are." His gaze was intense, searching. "And so are you." Before Abigail could process his words, Blake reached out, gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The simple gesture sent a wave of warmth through her body. "I should check on the children," she said, suddenly feeling flustered. "It's getting late." Blake nodded, withdrawing his hand. "Of course. Good night, Abby." "Good night, Blake." As she hurried through the snow to the foreman's cabin, Abigail's mind was a whirl of confused emotions. Mrs. Hollis's words from earlier echoed in her thoughts, along with the memory of Blake's gentle touch and the intensity of his gaze. Was it possible that he felt something for her beyond their shared responsibility for the children? And if he did, what then? The Christmas preparations brought a festive atmosphere to the ranch. Blake returned from the foothills with a magnificent pine tree that nearly touched the ceiling in the main house's parlor. The children helped decorate it with ornaments Mrs. Hollies had stored away years ago, plus handmade decorations they crafted under Abigail's guidance. A trip to town yielded gifts for everyone, practical items like books and clothing, but also special treasures like a carved wooden horse for William, a beautiful hair ribbon for Mary, a pocket knife for Joseph, a slingshot for Thomas, and a doll with real porcelain features for Sarah. Abigail used her modest savings to purchase a fine leather-bound journal for Blake. Noticing how often he wrote in the evenings, on Christmas Eve, they gathered in the main house for a magnificent feast. Mrs. Hollies had outdone herself with roast turkey, ham, potatoes, various vegetables from the root cellar, fresh bread, and 3 different pies. The ranch hands joined them, making for a boisterous, joyful gathering. After dinner, Blake surprised everyone by producing a fiddle. "My father played," he explained as he tuned the instrument. "I'm not nearly as skilled, but I know a few carols." His playing was better than he'd let on, and soon everyone was singing along to Silent Night and God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. The children's faces glowed with happiness in the firelight, their eyes bright with the magic of the season. Later, when the hands had returned to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Hollies had retired to her room, Blake asked the children if they would like to hear the Christmas story. They gathered around him near the fire as he read from the Bible, his deep voice giving weight to the familiar words. Abigail watched from her chair, her heart full to bursting. In just a few short months, they had become a family in all but name. The realization brought tears to her eyes. After the story, it was time for the children to hang their stockings and go to bed. Blake had insisted they all stay in the main house on Christmas Eve, the boys in the guest room, the girls sharing the room that had once been intended for his own children. As Abigail tucked the girls into bed, Sarah asked a question that caught her off guard. "Miss Abby, is Mr. Blake our father now?" Abigail smoothed the blanket, considering her response. "He cares for you very much, just as a father would. But officially," Mary pressed. "Thomas said Mr. Blake signed papers to be our guardian. Doesn't that make him our father? In a legal sense, yes," Abigail acknowledged. "He's responsible for your welfare, your education, your future." "And you're like our mother," Sarah said with certainty. "Except you and Mr. Blake aren't married." The innocent observation made Abigail's cheeks warm. That's right, I'm your teacher and your caretaker." "But you love us like a mother," Mary insisted, "and Mr. Blake loves us like a father, so you're almost our parents." "I do love you," Abigail confirmed, kissing each girl on the forehead. "Now get some sleep. Morning will come early, and I suspect there will be wonderful surprises waiting." After checking on the boys, who were still too excited to sleep but promised to try, Abigail made her way back downstairs. She found Blake placing carefully wrapped packages under the tree. "They're finally settling down," she told him. "Though I doubt they'll sleep much tonight," Blake smiled, adding one last package to the pile. "Christmas Eve was always the longest night of the year when I was a boy." The waiting seemed endless. Abigail noticed there were more packages than she remembered purchasing. "You've been busy with secret shopping, it seems." "A few additional items," Blake admitted. "Nothing extravagant." Abigail moved closer to the tree, admiring how the candles made the ornaments sparkle. "The girls asked me tonight if you were their father now." Blake paused in his arranging of the gifts. "What did you tell them?" "That you care for them as a father would, and that legally you are their guardian." He nodded slowly. "And how do you feel about that, Abby? About my relationship with the children?" Abigail turned to face him. "I think you're wonderful with them. They adore you, and I can see how much you care for each of them." "And us?" Blake asked, his voice low. "How do you feel about us?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Abigail's heart hammered in her chest. "I don't know what you mean," she said, though she feared or perhaps hoped that she did. Blake moved closer, close enough that she could see the firelight reflected in his eyes. I think you do, Abby. These past months sharing this ranch, raising these children together. It's become more than an arrangement of convenience, hasn't it? Abigail swallowed, finding her throat suddenly dry. Yes, she admitted, it has. Blake reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. When you arrived that day with 5 children and nowhere to go, I thought you were bringing complications I didn't need. I had no idea you were bringing exactly what I needed most, a chance to live again, to care again. Blake, Abigail whispered, unable to find more words. I'm not good with fancy speeches, he continued. But I need you to know that I've come to care for you deeply, Abby. Not just as the children's teacher or as my partner in raising them, but as a woman, a remarkable, compassionate, stubborn woman who brought light back into a dark place. Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. I care for you too, she confessed, more than I should, perhaps. Why shouldn't you? Blake's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. Is it so wrong for 2 people who share a home, a purpose, a family in all but name to care for each other? No, Abigail replied softly, it isn't wrong. Blake lifted his free hand to cup her cheek, his touch achingly tender. May I kiss you, Abby? I've wanted to for longer than I care to admit. Instead of answering, Abigail rose onto her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as Blake drew her closer, his arm encircling her waist. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Well, Blake said, a smile spreading across his face, that's a Christmas gift I hadn't dared hope for. Abigail laughed softly, feeling light-headed and wonderfully alive. I should check on the children one more time, then retire. Of course. Blake reluctantly released her, but not before stealing another quick kiss. Sleep well, Abby. Christmas morning will come early. As predicted, the children were awake before dawn, their excited voices echoing through the house as they discovered their filled stockings. Blake and Abigail exchanged knowing smiles over cups of coffee as the children exclaimed over oranges, candy sticks, and small trinkets. After a hearty breakfast, they gathered around the tree for the opening of gifts. The children's joy was contagious as they unwrapped their presents, each one carefully chosen with their interests and needs in mind. Joseph nearly wept when he opened a tooled leather saddle bag with his initials burned into the flap. Thomas whooped with delight at his new fishing pole. Mary twirled in her new blue dress, while Sarah clutched her porcelain doll to her chest. William galloped his wooden horse across the floor, making realistic neighing sounds. There's still one gift left, Blake observed, reaching under the tree for a small package wrapped in silver paper. For you, Abby. Surprised, Abigail accepted the package. Inside was a velvet box containing a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny portrait of all 5 children on one side. The other side is empty, Blake explained, waiting for another portrait, perhaps. It's beautiful, Abigail whispered, blinking back tears. Thank you. Open mine next, Mary urged, handing Blake a clumsily wrapped package. Inside was a handkerchief with BM embroidered in the corner in slightly crooked stitches. I made it myself, Mary said proudly. Miss Abby helped a little with the letters. It's perfect, Blake declared, carefully folding the handkerchief and placing it in his breast pocket. Thank you, Mary. Each child had made or selected a small gift for Blake and Abigail drawings, a whittled whistle, a pressed flower bookmark. Finally, Abigail presented Blake with the leather journal. For your thoughts, she said as he ran his fingers over the supple cover. I've noticed you writing in the evenings. Blake looked touched. Thank you, I'll treasure it. As the children played with their new gifts, Blake drew Abigail aside. There's one more thing, he said, his expression suddenly serious. Not exactly a Christmas gift, but something I've been considering for some time. From his pocket, he produced an official-looking document. I've had Judge Harmon draw up adoption papers. If you agree, I'd like to make the children legally ours, not just wards, but our children in the eyes of the law. Abigail scanned the document, her heart racing. Blake, this would make them truly ours. That's my hope, he confirmed. But there's a complication. What's that? Blake took a deep breath. Judge Harmon pointed out that an unmarried man and woman adopting children together is unconventional. He suggested it would be more appropriate if we were married. Abigail's eyes widened. Is this a proposal? Blake laughed softly, taking her hands in his. Not a very romantic one, I'm afraid. Let me try again. He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands, oblivious to the children who had stopped their play to watch with wide eyes. Abigail Shaw, you brought these orphans to my ranch, and I told you then it's ours now. I meant the responsibility, but I've come to realize I meant so much more. You and these children have become my life, my joy, my future. Will you marry me, Abby? Make this family official in every way. Through tears of happiness, Abigail nodded. Yes, she managed to say. Yes, I will marry you, Blake Maxwell. A cheer went up from the children, who rushed forward to encircle Blake and Abigail in an exuberant group hug. Mrs. Hollies appeared in the doorway, beaming with approval. When? William asked excitedly. When will you get married? Blake looked to Abigail, raising an eyebrow in question. New Year's Day, she decided. A new beginning for our family. Perfect, Blake agreed, sealing the arrangement with a kiss that made the children giggle and Mrs. Hollies cluck her tongue in mock disapproval. The week between Christmas and New Year's was a flurry of preparations. News of the impending wedding spread quickly, and the small church in town was decorated with evergreen boughs and white ribbons. Mrs. Hollies worked tirelessly on a special dress for Abigail, altering one of Catherine's that had been preserved in a cedar chest. Mary and Sarah were to be flower girls, while the boys would stand with Blake. On New Year's Day, 1877, Blake Maxwell and Abigail Shaw were married in a simple ceremony attended by the ranch hands, townspeople who had come to know them, and, of course, the 5 children who had brought them together. Judge Harmon, who performed the ceremony in the absence of a regular minister, made a point of mentioning how fitting it was to begin the new year with the formation of a new family. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch for a celebration that lasted well into the evening. When the last guest had departed and the children were tucked into bed in what was now officially their home, Blake led his new wife to the porch where they had first begun to know each other. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead in a velvet sky. Blake wrapped a warm blanket around Abigail's shoulders, then drew her into his arms. Mrs. Maxwell, he murmured against her hair. That has a fine sound to it. Abigail smiled, leaning into his embrace. It does indeed, husband. Are you happy, Abby, truly? She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. Happier than I ever imagined possible. We have 5 wonderful children, a beautiful home, and each other. What more could anyone ask for? Blake kissed her tenderly. Nothing more, though perhaps in time we might add to our family. The children have mentioned they wouldn't mind a baby brother or sister. Abigail laughed, feeling a blush warm her cheeks despite the cold night air. Have they indeed? Well, I suppose we shouldn't disappoint them. They stood together in the starlight, contemplating the future that stretched before them, a future neither could have imagined 6 months earlier, when a determined schoolteacher arrived with 5 orphans and nowhere to go. The ranch that had once seemed too quiet, too empty, was now filled with laughter, learning, and love, a true home for all who dwelled there. As spring arrived in 1877, the Maxwell Ranch flourished under the care of its expanded family. The adoption was finalized in February, making the children officially Maxwells. By May, Abigail's slightly altered dresses and the gentle glow in her cheeks announced another upcoming addition to the family. In the years that followed, the ranch grew as steadily as the Maxwell family. 2 more children joined the original 5, first a daughter with Blake's stormy eyes and Abigail's auburn hair, then a son who was the image of his father. The original orphans thrived. Thomas eventually became foreman of the ranch. Joseph developed a reputation as the finest horse trainer in the territory. Mary married a young doctor and established a home in town. Sarah became a teacher like her adoptive mother, and William, always adventurous, joined the U.S. Cavalry before returning to help run the family ranch. Blake and Abigail's love deepened with each passing year, weathering the inevitable hardships of frontier life with unwavering commitment to each other and their children. Their story became something of a legend in the region, how a brave schoolteacher brought orphan children to a lonely rancher's door, and how together they built a dynasty of love that would last for generations. And it all began with 7 simple words spoken on a summer evening in 1876. "Then it's ours now."